Hello, I'm Wilson Bickford. Thanks for tuning in again. I'm going to show you a nice wet-on-wet technique for rendering a very simple sunset sky. Very colorful. It's a pretty easy process. Now there are many liquid-based mediums that are white pigmented oil-based mediums on the market. I'm going to mix my own in lieu of having one that's already pre-mixed. What I'm going to use is some of the Grumbacher alkyd medium. The Charvin quick dry medium would work as well. Any oil-based medium will work for this. I've got the Grumbacher alkyd medium here today. I'm going to take some of that with some Charvin titanium zinc white, and basically it just amounts to thinning the paint down. I have a 2-inch primer brush here, Creative Mark primer brush that I'm using, which is a stiff bristle. It's a big brush for a lot of quick coverage on a bigger canvas. So I'm thinning this down. I'm going to put a very thin layer on this canvas. Now since this is a sky, it won't be a completed painting by any stretch. So I'm just going to kind of paint in the top half where I'd have the sky. And I'll put it in the context of a painting later on just before I close up, just to show you what it would look like with something silhouetted against it for the background. But the idea is to put in a nice thin coat of this. Now probably on camera you're having a hard time seeing this because I'm putting white on a white background, so there's not much contrast there. But I can see by the gloss of the studio lights here where I'm putting this. So the idea is to get a very thin coat, and ultimately you want to be able to get a fingerprint off of it like this. So as long as you can get a fingerprint anywhere on that canvas, you know that it's adequately covered. Won't take much. Like I said, you're not painting your wall here, so don't. People have a tendency to put too much of that. Okay, now down here on the palette I'm going to take a little bit of cadmium yellow pale. I'm using the Charvin brand of paints today. By the way, these are great paints, really pigment rich and buttery. Nice paint to work with. I'm going to take this yellow. I'm envisioning a horizon line somewhere in here. Now what's below that later on would be up to you as you're composing your painting. It could be water, it could be land, it could be a mountain, distant hillside, whatever. Tree line, that's arbitrary. That's not what I'm showing you today. I'm going to show you the sky. So I'm taking this yellow into the white of the brush. I'm going to put a nice generous portion of yellow through there. I'm going to pick up a little bit of the red and mix it right into that yellow. Now obviously if I go more yellow than red, yellow and red will give me orange. So if I use a little more of the yellow, I will end up with kind of a orangey red, like that. If I use more red, I'll end up with something that's a little more reddish, like that. And as they say, the world is your oyster. It really doesn't matter. Use a color that you like. So I'm going to put a few little streaked lines of this in here. Now not every sunset is comprised of red, orange, yellow, purple. Sometimes you have that little bit of atmosphere left over where it was a blue day, nice clear day earlier in the day. And I'm going to come back and blend all this eventually. So it's going to look pretty awful here for just a second. I'm going to wipe this brush off. So I'm going to put a little bit of blue up in this top corner. It gives you that little feeling of hope, like you're going to have a clear day again someday. And I just kind of soften this out. Wipe the brush as you proceed just to get the excess paint, because you'll pick paint up from the canvas. So you want to keep wiping that out. And I'm just trying to remove any of the really coarse brush marks. Notice I'm using a great big flip-flop crisscross stroke, which tends to minimize any distinct brush direction in one direction or another. I'm going to take a little bit of white into the dirty brush. Now I could stop and clean this if I needed to, but I can wipe it clean enough for what I need to do, so I don't have to bother with that. I'm going to take white and some ultramarine blue, and I'm going to sneak that right up in this top corner. And the key is to blend it down into the previous red that I've put in there. See, by having the white base coat on, it allows you to blend all of your colors very seamlessly, almost as if you'd put them on there with an airbrush. You can get that degree of really fine blending by using this technique. It's a great technique for doing your large areas like skies and background water areas, backgrounds for portraits or still life, florals, anything like that. I'm just going to blend that out a little bit like that again and soften it. And me being me, I love blue. It's my favorite color, so I think I'm going to sneak a little more blue up in there. That's not a right or a wrong, it's a preference. So use the colors that you like. You could make these much more intense. You could make them much more pastel. That's totally up to you. You're the artist, so you're the one that has to make these decisions. But I want to soften that out a little bit like that. A lot of times in a sunset like this, you will see darker silhouetted clouds. So I'm going to take a fan brush. This is a white bristle, boar bristle, very stiff. I'm going to start with a little bit of white into that blue. And if you look at my palette here, I'm just going to actually sneak the red that I used in that puddle right over into my blue. Maybe add a touch more blue. I'm going to test this color. Painting is a lot like making soup. You have to test it. Taste it, see what you get. I'm going to try that. I want kind of a purplish tone. Something a little darker so it reads as a silhouette. And if I use just the corner of this brush and I do a little flutter and I turn the brush at different angles, I'm envisioning the top of a cloud like that. So if I can see that in my mind, I simply put it on here. And I kind of blend it in. I want a little more distinct edge on the top, but not as much on the bottom. So I'm going to wipe the brush and just soften that bottom away. Now, linear perspective says that anything in the distance appears smaller. So the clouds that are higher on your canvas are the ones that are more overhead. So as you go lower and they recede into the distance, they get smaller and tend to string out a little bit, get a little bit stringier. So I'm going to load up the same color. Ideally, you could make that just a whisker lighter. That would adhere to the rule of aerial perspective. That would get a little bit lighter as it goes away. So I just snuck a little bit of white into that as well. And these are going to be smaller and just kind of disappear. And sometimes, depending on the actual conditions of what you've got going on, you'll see a little rim of light on the back of these clouds, on the top I should say, that's coming from the back. See, if I take a clean 2-inch primer brush, this is a clean one I have laying here, I can just further soften that out a little bit. And one of my favorite things to do, I'm going to take a little flat brush here, a sable flat. I'm going to take a little bit of this thinner white that I've had mixed up over here, which is just the base coat that I put on. I'm using the thinner paint because it'll stick to this canvas a little easier. You notice I'm using an overhand grip, and if I just put a little rim of light, like the silver lining on the top of this cloud. The sun's coming from below, but it's just kind of filtering through the top edges of these clouds a little bit. And I soften it a little bit on the inside edge. It won't take much. Don't overdo it. And this is optional. Sometimes you'll see it where it's just a dark silhouette and you don't get that effect. I'm just showing you different effects so you can compose these on your own. But this is a really easy way to get a nice, believable sky without a whole lot of work. And just soften that edge a little bit to the bottom edge of the white so it kind of ties into the cloud somewhat. And like I said before, this would have to be in the context of a painting. Perhaps maybe you had something that looked like this. I'm going to take this dirty primer brush that I had. I'll take a little bit of blue, ultramarine blue, Van Dyke brown, maybe a touch of yellow, something of subdued, really dark greenish gray, just to show some sort of formation over here on the backside, whether it was a hill or a mountain. Like I said, you could make this a seascape and have water below, but you'll see that once you put something in front of this, it tends to push that sky back, and that sky will always look nicer and better once you kind of put it in its proper perspective. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is a pretty easy technique to do. This is a very popular subject that I do in my classes a lot. People love these sunsets, as do I. These are really nice. I love the color in them, and they're pretty easy to render. So don't be afraid to give this a shot. Try this wet on wet technique out, see what you think. Take care, and I'll see you next time.